When you think about these huge national movements, there's often one person who stands out, right? Like Washington for America or Garibaldi for Italy. Well, for India, that person was, of course, Mahatma Gandhi. But here's the thing, his story isn't just about him. It's about how he managed to empower millions of people, completely changing the game for India's fight for freedom. So, let's get into it. So, before Gandhi really stepped onto the scene in India, the whole independence struggle, well, it was a pretty exclusive club. It was basically a bunch of well-meaning, educated folks, doctors, lawyers, intellectuals, talking amongst themselves. And they were missing the most important piece of the puzzle, the actual people of India. You could say it was just a conversation happening behind closed doors, not this massive roar out on the streets. And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do you take this kind of niche political movement and blow it up into something so powerful it could shake the foundations of the biggest empire on the planet? Well, the answer is all wrapped up in the story of this one man and his pretty radical new idea. All right, so to really get just how huge of a change Gandhi brought about, we got to take a step back and look at what the movement was like before he showed up. Okay, so back then, the main political group, the Indian National Congress, was pretty much split down the middle. On one side, you had the moderates. Their whole strategy was, writing petitions, making polite requests, basically asking the British nicely for a little piece of the pie. And on the other side, you had the extremists. They were younger, a lot more fired up, and their attitude was like, nope, we're done begging. We want Swaraj, total freedom, and we'll confront the British head on to get it. But here's the fascinating part. For all their disagreements, they shared one massive blind spot. Neither group had any real connection to the vast majority of Indians, the farmers, the factory workers, the people living in villages. And then everything changes. The year is 1915, and this lawyer comes back to India after spending 2 decades in South Africa. But he didn't come back as just some lawyer. He came back as a leader, someone who'd been shaped by fighting intense racial discrimination, and he brought with him a brand new weapon for the fight for freedom. And that weapon was called satyagraha. It basically means truth force. Now, the idea itself is actually pretty simple, but it's also incredibly powerful. It goes like this. If your cause is right, if you're standing on the side of truth, you don't need to use violence. You can fight back against oppression with nonviolent resistance, with civil disobedience. This was a whole philosophy he tested and perfected while fighting for the rights of Indians back in South Africa. So, in one of his first big speeches back in India, Gandhi just lays it all out there. He's looking at this room packed with princes and rich, powerful people, and he basically tells them, this isn't going to cut it. He made it crystal clear. You can't win freedom with just a handful of elites. It has to be a movement of the masses. And that's the key, right? His goal wasn't just to be the leader. It was to wake up the power that was already inside the people themselves. So, how did he actually pull this off? Well, he didn't kick things off with some giant nationwide campaign. Nope, he started small. He focused on local problems, on injustices that really mattered to regular, everyday people. And this is exactly how he started building that trust, piece by piece. First up, in a place called Champaran, he sided with farmers who were being forced to grow indigo for the British instead of the food they needed to survive. Then, in Ahmedabad, he supported mill workers who were demanding a fair wage. After that in Kedah, he helped out peasants who were being hit with insane taxes, even though their crops had failed. And in every single one of these fights, he used his method, satyagraha. And guess what? Every single time it worked. He won. And you see, these weren't just political wins. They were proof that his whole idea could actually work. It showed everyone that nonviolent resistance wasn't just a nice thought. It was a real strategy. And that's what earned him the trust of the common people. He wasn't just some fancy lawyer from London anymore. They started calling him the Mahatma, which means the great soul. So now, with the people behind him, with the trust of the masses, Gandhi was ready. It was time to scale up, time to take his strategy national and go right after the British Empire. And he led a whole series of these huge countrywide campaigns. You had the Roll at Satyagraha, which was a massive protest against these really unfair laws that let the British lock people up without a trial. Then came the non-cooperation movement. This was a huge deal. It was a call for Indians to just stop cooperating with the British system, leave the schools, the courts, their jobs, just walk away. But the one that really became legendary, the civil disobedience movement. And it all started with a simple act of protest over something you find in every kitchen: salt. See, the British had this law that made it illegal for any Indian to make or sell their own salt. It forced them to buy salt from the British, and, of course, it was heavily taxed. So to protest this, Gandhi, who was 61 years old at the time, by the way, decided he was going to walk 240 miles to the ocean to make his own salt in defiance. He started out with just 78 people, but by the time he got to the coast, thousands had joined the march. At first, the world's media pretty much laughed it off. I mean, Time magazine in the US kind of mocked him, calling him this spindly little man, and they figured his protest would just collapse in a couple of days. They had absolutely no idea how powerful this simple act was about to become. Fast forward just a few weeks. Gandhi makes it to the sea, he makes his own salt, and this inspires millions of people all over India to do the same. And that same magazine? Oh, they changed their tune real quick. Suddenly, that frail man was a saint and a national leader who had, and I quote, reduced the opposition to pulp. The Salt March put Gandhi on the world stage, and it was undeniable proof that massive, nonviolent protests could seriously challenge an empire. After that, the momentum was just unstoppable. Now, the fight for freedom still had another 17 years to go, but when the end finally came, it was both this incredible victory and a deep, deep tragedy. And on August 15th, 1947, after all those decades of struggle, it happened. India was finally free. The British Raj had come to an end. But this freedom came at a terrible cost, because the decision was made to partition British India into two separate countries, India and Pakistan. And this just unleashed some of the most horrific violence you can imagine. Millions of people were forced from their homes, and hundreds of thousands died in the riots that swept across the land. For Gandhi, a man who had spent his entire life talking about unity, this was just an absolute heartbreak. He didn't see partition as some kind of political solution. To him, it was a profound moral failure. And in the last chapter of his life, Gandhi took on what might have been his toughest mission yet. So while everyone else was in Delhi celebrating the birth of a new nation, where was Gandhi? He was hundreds of miles away. He wasn't at any of the parties or parades. He was walking, often barefoot, through villages that had been ripped apart by religious violence, begging Hindus and Muslims to stop fighting and trying to comfort the victims, no matter what side they were on. But his constant calls for peace actually made extremists on his own side angry. They thought he was being too sympathetic to Muslims. And so, on January 30th, 1948, on his way to a prayer meeting, he was shot and killed by a Hindu nationalist. In the end, he died for the very thing he lived for: unity. You know, Gandhi's legacy isn't just about India getting its independence. It's so much bigger than that. It's a lesson for all of us, for all time. What he proved is that when people come together, organized, committed, and united, they are the most powerful force for change there is. And it really makes you think, with all the enormous challenges we're facing in the world today, what could we accomplish if we just remembered that we have that same power?